Lady Sephora stood tall in the grand hall of the Xilari High Council, her deep violet eyes filled with confidence. Her people, the Xilari, were one of the most advanced races in the galaxy. Their strength, intelligence, and long lifespans made them superior, or so they believed. Across from her, Commander Daniel Holt of the United Earth Fleet remained calm. He had come to negotiate an alliance between humanity and the Xilari Empire. The galaxy was changing, and war was on the horizon. But Sephora found the idea of working with humans ridiculous. "You expect us to fight beside you." Sephora's voice was smooth, but her tone carried a sharp edge. "Your people are weak, short-lived, and fragile. Our bloodline has remained pure and strong for thousands of years. Why would we mix with something lesser?" Daniel didn't flinch at her words. He had heard this kind of arrogance before. Many advanced alien races had underestimated humanity in the past, thinking humans were too new, too inexperienced, or too ordinary. And yet, time and time again, humans had proven them wrong. "With respect, Lady Sephora," he replied, his voice steady, "it's not about bloodlines. It's about survival. The Kelp Dominion is expanding. They have already destroyed 5 star systems. If we don't stand together, we'll all fall separately." Sephora sighed, shaking her head. "Your people may be used to fear, but we are not. The Xilari have never needed help from outsiders, and we will not start now." The High Council members murmured in agreement. They, too, looked down on humanity. To them, humans were unpredictable, too emotional, and too physically weak to be considered equals. Daniel clenched his jaw, but remained polite. He had seen what the Kelp Dominion could do. He had witnessed entire planets burn under their attacks. The Xilari thought their superior genetics would protect them, but Daniel knew better. "Very well," he said, stepping back. "I only hope you don't regret this decision when the enemy is at your doorstep." Sephora smirked. "That will never happen." A month later, Sephora sat in her private chamber aboard a Xilari warship, reviewing battle reports. The Kelp Dominion had moved faster than expected. Several Xilari outposts had fallen, and for the first time in centuries, her people were struggling to push back an enemy. Still, she refused to believe that they needed humans. The Xilari were the strongest race in the sector. They would find a way to win, without lowering themselves to begging for help. A sudden alarm blared through the ship. Sephora's eyes widened. She tapped into the command console. "What's happening?" A voice came through the speakers, filled with urgency. "Lady Sephora, the enemy has breached our defenses. They're boarding the ship." Sephora's heart pounded. This was impossible. No enemy had ever dared to invade a Xilari warship. Yet the security footage confirmed the truth. Kelp soldiers were flooding in, their armored bodies cutting through Xilari warriors with terrifying efficiency. She grabbed a plasma blade and rushed out of her chamber. She was a noble, but she had trained in combat. She would fight for her people. The hallways were filled with chaos. Xilari warriors, once confident in their superiority, were falling one by one. The Kelp were ruthless, their insect-like forms moving with deadly precision. Sephora fought fiercely, cutting down enemy soldiers, but the battle was already lost. Her ship was breaking apart, flames licking the corridors. She barely had time to reach an escape pod before an explosion rocked the entire vessel. She pressed the launch button, and the pod shot into space. Through the window, she watched in horror as her once proud warship crumbled into debris. Her people had been defeated. For the first time in her life, Sephora felt true fear, the unexpected rescue. Her pod drifted through space for hours. The emergency systems kept her alive, but her situation was hopeless. The Kelp Dominion didn't take prisoners. If they found her, she was as good as dead. Then a new signal appeared on the pod scanner. A ship was approaching. Sephora tensed, preparing for the worst. But as the vessel came into view, she recognized its design. A human ship. She bit her lip. This was humiliating. Of all the possible rescuers, it had to be them. The docking system engaged, and the pod's hatch opened. A group of humans stepped inside, weapons ready, until they saw her condition. At the front stood Commander Daniel Holt. "Well," he said, crossing his arms, "looks like your superior bloodline didn't keep you out of trouble after all." Sephora wanted to snap at him, but she was too exhausted. For the first time in her life, she had no choice but to accept help from a human, and that realization stung more than any battle wound. Sephora sat silently in the medical bay of the human battleship, her pride burning hotter than the wounds on her body. The bright white walls, the clean scent of sterilized air, it was all unfamiliar. The Xilari did not rely on others for help, and yet here she was, injured and weak, surrounded by the very species she had once called inferior. Daniel Holt stood near the entrance, arms crossed as he observed her. His blue eyes held no mockery, only curiosity and something else, concern. No, she refused to believe that. Humans were emotional creatures, but she would not mistake their kindness for strength. "You should rest," Daniel said finally. "I do not need your pity," Sephora snapped, sitting up straighter despite the pain. Daniel sighed. "This isn't pity. It's common sense. You barely made it out alive. You're lucky we found you before the Celt did." The mention of the Celt made her fists tighten. The battle had been a disaster. Her people had fallen in ways she never thought possible. The Xilari High Council had underestimated the enemy. She had underestimated the enemy. "How bad is it?" she asked after a moment, her voice quieter. Daniel's expression hardened. "The Celt Dominion has taken half your empire's outer territories. Their fleet is pushing deeper. Your people are losing." Losing. The word felt foreign to her. The Xilari were supposed to be superior. Their warriors trained from birth. Their technology was unmatched. And yet, none of it had stopped the Celt. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "No. The High Council will find a way. They will push back." Daniel hesitated before answering. "They tried. It didn't work." Severa's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Daniel tapped a control panel, bringing up a holographic display. The screen showed battlefield reports, destroyed warships, and captured Xilari worlds. But the worst part was the final message from the High Council, desperate, broken, and calling for aid. Severa's heart pounded. The Council was asking for help. That had never happened in their history. It meant only one thing. The Xilari were no longer the strongest. A harsh reality. Severa stared at the screen, her mind racing. This was impossible. How could a race as mighty as the Xilari be pushed to the brink of destruction? Daniel studied her carefully. "You thought your people were invincible," he said, his voice unreadable. "But no species is. Not even yours." She looked away, swallowing her frustration. "And you think humans are different?" Daniel gave a small, knowing smile. "No, but we never believed we were invincible. That's why we adapt. That's why we survive." The words unsettled her. Adaptation. It was something that Xilari never valued. To them, strength came from perfection, from maintaining their superior genetics. But humans, they were different. Their power did not come from one trait, one ability, or one tradition. It came from change. For the first time, Severa wondered if that was why the humans were still standing while the Xilari were falling. The offer. A few hours later, Daniel returned with an offer. "The United Earth Fleet is willing to help," he said, sitting across from her. "But the Xilari need to agree to an alliance. A real one." Severa narrowed her eyes. "You mean surrender?" "No," Daniel replied. "I mean a partnership. We fight together, or you lose your home." Severa's pride flared again, but this time, it was weaker than before. The truth was in front of her. Without help, her people would not survive. She exhaled slowly. "And what do humans gain from this?" Daniel leaned forward. "The Celt Dominion won't stop at your empire. If we don't stand together now, humanity will be next. We don't fight because we think we're the strongest. We fight because we refuse to fall. His words struck something deep within her. The Xelari had spent centuries believing in their supremacy. But humans, they had built their strength from struggle. They fought not because they were superior, but because they had to. And maybe, just maybe, that made them stronger. Severa closed her eyes, inhaling deeply before making the hardest decision of her life. "Fine," she said. "We fight together." Daniel nodded, a small smile appearing on his lips. Good choice. Little did they know, this alliance would change the future of both their species forever. Severa stood on the command deck of the human battleship Vanguard, arms crossed as she watched the glowing star map before her. The situation was dire. The Celt Dominion was advancing faster than expected, swallowing Xelari worlds one by one. The humans had promised to fight, but even with their help, victory was far from certain. Daniel Holt stood beside her, calm but focused. "Your fleet is gathering at the Sephora system," he said, pointing at the map. "But if we don't act soon, they'll be wiped out before reinforcements arrive." Severa exhaled sharply. She hated this, hated feeling powerless, hated that the humans were now her only hope. "The Xelari are not weak," she said. "They will hold the line." Daniel arched an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" "Because the last time they tried, it didn't end well." She shot him a glare, but deep down, she knew he was right. The Xelari warriors were strong, but their tactics were outdated. They fought with honor, refusing to retreat or change strategies, even when it cost them entire fleets. The Celt, however, had no such limitations. They adapted. They exploited weakness. And right now, the biggest weakness was Xelari pride. "We need a plan," Daniel continued. "Something the Celt won't expect. Something different." Severa frowned. "Different how?" Daniel tapped the holographic display, shifting the battlefield map. "Your people fight in rigid formations. We don't. We move fast, strike from unexpected angles. If we combine Xelari strength with human unpredictability, we might have a chance." The idea unsettled her. The Xelari did not change their ways. But then again, the Xelari had never been on the brink of extinction before. She took a deep breath. "What do you propose?" "The plan that shouldn't work." An hour later, Severa and Daniel stood before a group of Xelari commanders and human officers in the war room. The tension in the air was thick. The Xelari did not trust humans, and the humans were skeptical of their new allies. Daniel stepped forward. "The Celt are expecting you to fight the way you always do. That's why they keep winning. So, we're going to do something different." He activated the hologram, showing a new formation, human and Xelari ships mixed together. The Xelari warriors murmured in disapproval. Their fleets had always been separate, pure. "This is madness," one of the Xelari commanders snapped. "Our ships are superior. We do not need humans in our formations." "Superior," Daniel echoed. "Tell that to the planets you've already lost." The room fell silent. Severa felt her muscles tense. No one had ever spoken to a Xelari commander like that. But Daniel wasn't wrong. She took a step forward. "Enough," she said firmly. "Human strategies are strange to us, but our way is failing. We must adapt, or we will be destroyed." The Xelari commander looked at her in shock. "You would trust these creatures?" Severa met his gaze without flinching. "I would trust survival." The commander hesitated, then finally lowered his head. "Very well. We will try it your way." Daniel smirked. "That's all I needed to hear." Into the fire. 2 days later, the combined fleet arrived at the Sephora system. The battlefield was chaos. Xelari ships were struggling against the Celt forces, their formations breaking apart under relentless enemy fire. Severa gripped the armrests of her chair on the Vanguard. "We're running out of time." Daniel nodded. Time to show them what humans can do. The mixed fleet moved into position. Sealari warships took the front, their thick armor absorbing the brunt of enemy fire. Human ships darted between them, striking from unexpected angles, disrupting the Celts' formations. The Celt hesitated. They had never seen Sealari fight like this before, and that hesitation cost them. Explosions lit up the void as Celt ships fell one by one. The tide of battle shifted. For the first time in weeks, the Sealari were winning. Sephora watched in awe. This wasn't just a battle. It was a lesson. Strength alone was not enough. Change, adaptation, that was the real power. Daniel grinned. Told you it would work. Sephora exhaled, a small smile forming on her lips. Perhaps humans are not as weak as I thought. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. The aftermath of the battle at Sephora was unlike anything that Sealari had ever experienced. Victory was rare against the Celt Dominion, but today they had won. Not just survived, but truly won. The battlefield was littered with debris from destroyed Celt warships, and for the first time in decades, Sealari warriors stood tall, knowing they had turned the tide. Sephora stood on the observation deck of the Vanguard, gazing at the wreckage. The burning remains of Celt cruisers floated in the cold void of space, a silent testament to their triumph. But despite the victory, she felt unsettled. It was not Sealari's strength that had secured this battle. It was human strategy. She glanced at Daniel Holt, who stood beside her, his arms crossed with that ever-present smirk on his face. "You look troubled," he remarked. Sephora exhaled sharply. This should not have worked. The Sealari have fought for centuries with our own tactics. Yet, in one battle, everything changed. Daniel chuckled. Change is good. Your people just never had a reason to try before. But now, they do. She frowned. And if we become dependent on human tactics? Daniel shrugged. Then you evolve. You take what works, make it your own, and improve it. That's what humans do. Sephora fell silent. It was such a simple idea, yet so foreign to her people. The Sealari prided themselves on tradition, on purity. But tradition had merely led to their destruction. She turned away from the viewport. The fleet must be reorganized. The Sealari need to understand why this worked and how we can continue winning. Daniel nodded. Agreed. But there's something else we need to talk about. Sephora raised an eyebrow. What? His expression turned serious. The Celt won't let this defeat go unanswered. They'll come back stronger. We have to be ready before they do. The growing divide. Back on the Sealari capital world, the victory at Sephora had shaken the High Council. Some called it a miracle. Others saw it as a disgrace. Human methods pollute our ways. One council elder growled, slamming his fist on the table. This victory is no victory at all. It is a warning. Sephora sat at the far end of the Grand Hall, listening in silence. Around her, Sealari warlords debated fiercely. Some argued for accepting human aid, while others saw it as a humiliation. The humans may be weak in body, but their minds are sharp. Another warlord countered. Without them, Sephora would have been lost. The elder narrowed his eyes. And what next? Will we allow humans to lead our battles, to command our fleets? Murmurs of discontent spread through the chamber. Sephora finally stood, her presence silencing the room. We did not win because we abandoned our strength, she said. We won because we combined it with something greater. Adaptation. The elder scoffed. And what do you propose, Sephora? That we surrender our ways. That we become like the humans. She met his gaze without flinching. I propose we survive. The chamber fell silent. Unlikely allies. Later that night, Sephora met Daniel in the secluded gardens of the Sealari Palace. The moon cast a silver glow over the trees, and the air was thick with the scent of blooming flora. Daniel leaned against a stone pillar, watching her closely. I take it the council wasn't thrilled. She sighed. They are afraid. The old ways have failed them, but they cannot let go. Daniel nodded. Change is hard, especially for people who have lived by the same rules for centuries. Sephora looked at him, eyes filled with a mix of frustration and curiosity. How do humans do it? How do you accept change so easily? He chuckled. We don't. We fight it. We resist. But in the end, we know that if we don't change, we don't survive. It's in our nature. Sephora considered his words carefully. Perhaps that was what made humans so different. They didn't cling to the past. They adapted, they grew, they moved forward no matter the cost. For the first time, she wondered if her people could do the same. The Celt strike back. The answer came sooner than she expected. A distress signal echoed through the Xilari fleet. A Celt war force had bypassed their defenses and was heading straight for an important colony world. Sephora and Daniel stood in the war room, watching the incoming threat. They're learning, Daniel muttered. They're adapting to our adaptation. Sephora tightened her fists. Then we must be faster. Daniel smiled. Now you're thinking like a human. With that, the Xilari and human forces prepared for their next battle, one that would determine the future of their alliance. The alarm sirens rang through the Xilari fleet. Red warning lights flashed across the command deck of the Vanguard, signaling the incoming attack. Sephora stood tall, her golden eyes scanning the holographic map displaying the enemy fleet's movement. The Celt are moving faster than expected, a Xilari officer reported, his voice tense. They will reach the colony in less than 2 cycles. Daniel Holt crossed his arms, studying the battlefield with a calculating gaze. They're testing us. They want to see if we panic. Sephora frowned. Then we must not give them what they want. She turned to her officers. Mobilize the fleet. We intercept them before they reach the colony. But, Commander, another officer hesitated. Our forces are still recovering from the last battle. Daniel stepped forward. So are the Celt. They wouldn't attack unless they thought they could win, which means they see an opening. He smirked. Let's close it before they can use it. Sephora nodded. Prepare for battle. The Xilari warships roared to life, their engines glowing as they surged forward. The humans, though fewer in number, moved with precision, their vessels forming a tight formation alongside their alien allies. The war had changed. The Xilari were no longer fighting alone. The battlefield burns. Space erupted with fire as the 2 fleets clashed. The Celt warships, larger and more brutal in design, unleashed powerful plasma cannons, sending bright streaks of destruction toward the Xilari fleet. But this time, the Xilari were ready. Using Daniel's tactics, they avoided a direct engagement. Instead of charging head-on, they moved in swift, unpredictable patterns. Small Xilari strike teams darted between the enemy lines, hitting weak points and vanishing before the Celt could react. Focus on their command ship, Daniel ordered through the comms. Cut off their leadership, and the rest will fall apart. Sephora led the assault personally, piloting her own sleek warship through the chaos. She dodged enemy fire with skill, her movements precise and controlled. She had fought countless battles, but never like this. Never as part of something greater, a desperate gamble. Despite their strategy, the Celt forces refused to retreat. Their warships continued their assault, forcing the Xilari and human fleets into a dangerous position. They are not pulling back, Sephora muttered, gripping the controls tightly. They fight as if they have nothing to lose. Daniel's face darkened. Because they don't. This isn't just a battle. It's a trap. Suddenly, new enemy signals appeared on the scanners. More Celt warships emerged from the darkness of space, hidden until the perfect moment. It's an ambush, a Xilari officer shouted. The battlefield shifted instantly. The Xilari and human fleet were now surrounded, trapped between 2 enemy forces. For the first time in the battle, fear crept into Sephora's mind. Had they underestimated the Celt? Had they become too confident? Daniel's voice pulled her back to the moment. We're not out of this yet. His eyes locked onto the tactical display. But we need to take a risk. Scifi turned to him. What are you thinking? Daniel smirked. We punch a hole in their formation and escape, but not the way they expect. He pointed to the densest part of the enemy fleet. We go straight through, breaking the chains. Scifi hesitated. To charge into the strongest part of the enemy line was madness. But she had learned something from Daniel. Humans were unpredictable. And unpredictability had won them battles before. She made her decision. All ships, prepare for full-speed assault. We are breaking through. The auxiliary officers hesitated only for a moment before following her command. The fleet shifted, engines burning bright, as they turned toward the heart of the enemy formation. The Celt did not expect such a move. Their warships hesitated, caught off guard. And in that hesitation, the auxiliary struck. Explosions rippled through the enemy fleet as the combined forces of auxiliary and humans unleashed everything they had. Missiles, plasma cannons, and energy beams tore through the enemy ranks. Daniel's ship led the charge, weaving through the chaos with incredible precision. Almost there, he called over the comms. Just a little more. A massive explosion rocked the battlefield. The Celt command ship had been hit directly. Severa's eyes widened. Whoa. It wasn't us, Daniel replied, equally surprised. A new fleet had entered the battlefield. Sleek, advanced warships, ones that did not belong to the auxiliary, the humans, or the Celt. An unknown force had arrived. The turning point. The mysterious ships moved with terrifying speed and precision. Within moments, they had destroyed the remaining Celt forces, their advanced weapons cutting through the enemy like a blade through paper. Silence fell over the battlefield as the last Celt warship was reduced to wreckage. Scifi and Daniel exchanged glances. Who are they? She whispered. The answer came through their comms, in a voice neither auxiliary nor human. We have been watching. And now we have decided to intervene. The war was far from over. But now, a new player had entered the game. Tense silence filled the battlefield. The mysterious fleet floated in the darkness of space, their sleek silver ships untouched by the chaos. Their arrival had changed everything. Severa stared at the holographic display, watching as the unknown vessels positioned themselves in a defensive stance. The auxiliary and human forces had barely survived the Celt ambush, and now another player had entered the game. Daniel Holt crossed his arms. Well, this is new. A voice crackled through the communication channel, calm, steady, and alien. We are the Zelfar Dominion. We have observed your war. Now, we have chosen to act. Severa exchanged a look with Daniel. The name Zelfar was unfamiliar to her. Even in the vast records of the auxiliary archives, no mention of such a race existed. Chosen to act. Scifi repeated, her voice firm. Are you friend or foe? There was a pause before the reply came. That depends on your answer, Auxiliary Commander. The demand. A hologram flickered to life on the command deck of the Vanguard. A tall, slender alien stood before them, its body encased in dark armor. Its eyes glowed a deep silver, unreadable and cold. You have something we want, the Zelfar envoy said. Daniel narrowed his eyes. And what would that be? The alien turned its gaze toward Severa. Your child. A sharp silence followed. The auxiliary officers stiffened, and Severa's hands clenched into fists. What do you mean? She demanded. The Zelfar envoy remained emotionless. The child you carried is not ordinary. It is a fusion of human and auxiliary genetics, a combination never seen before. Severa's heart pounded. She had known her child was unique, but how could these strangers know about it? Daniel stepped forward, his expression dark. You expect us to just hand over a child? The Zelfar envoy tilted its head. This is not a request. A line in the sand. Tension crackled in the air. The auxiliary officers reached for their weapons, but Sephora raised a hand, stopping them. She took a deep breath, controlling her anger. "You have no right to demand this," she said coldly. The Zelfar envoy's expression did not change. "We have studied your war. We know that your forces are weak. Your enemies are growing stronger. Without us, you will fall." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Let me guess. You'll help us in exchange for the child." "Correct." Sephora felt the weight of the decision pressing on her. The Xelari had suffered greatly in the war. The humans, despite their strength, were still outnumbered. If they refused, the Zelfar could simply leave, and the next time the Celt attacked, there would be no escape. But handing over her child, that was unthinkable. She looked at Daniel, searching for an answer in his gaze. He did not hesitate. No deal. Sephora felt a strange sense of relief. She had expected nothing less from him. The Zelfar envoy remained silent for a moment before speaking again. "Then you leave us no choice." The transmission cut out. And then the Zelfar fleet moved. The battle of conviction. The Zelfar ships opened fire. Their weapons were unlike anything the Xelari or humans had seen before. Silent, precise, and devastatingly effective. Energy beams sliced through the void, striking Xelari and human ships with pinpoint accuracy. "We're under attack," a Xelari officer shouted. "Shields up. Evasive maneuvers." Sephora ordered. Daniel gritted his teeth as he watched the enemy formation. "They're not trying to destroy us. They're testing us." Sephora nodded. "Then let's show them our answer." The Xelari and human fleets retaliated, unleashing a counterattack. Plasma cannons fired, missiles launched, and energy beams cut through the darkness. The battle erupted into a storm of fire and light. Sephora piloted her warship with fierce determination, dodging enemy fire and returning precise, deadly shots. Daniel coordinated the human fleet, directing their forces with quick, tactical decisions. The battle was brutal. The Zelfar had superior technology, but they had underestimated something far more important: determination. The Xelari and humans fought not for power, not for conquest, but for family, for something worth protecting. And that made them unstoppable. The retreat. After hours of fierce combat, the Zelfar fleet suddenly stopped their attack. Their ships pulled back, retreating into the shadows of space. A final message came through the communication channel. "You have proven yourselves. For now." Then they were gone. Sephora exhaled deeply, her body exhausted but victorious. "They retreated," she murmured. Daniel leaned against the console, catching his breath. "Yeah, but they'll be back." Sephora placed a hand on her stomach, where her child grew. "Let them come," she said softly. "We'll be ready." Daniel smirked. "Damn right we will." The war was not over, but they had drawn a line in the sand. And now, the galaxy knew, this child would not be taken. Not while they still stood. The stars were quiet again. The battle had ended, but the weight of it still lingered in the air. Sephora stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, her gaze fixed on the vast darkness beyond. The Zelfar had retreated, but she knew they were not truly gone. They would watch, wait, and perhaps one day return. Daniel Holt stepped up beside her. He was bruised, his uniform torn from the battle, but his expression was steady. "So, what now?" Sephora placed a hand over her stomach. "We prepare. For our child. For our future." Daniel nodded, his usual grin returning. "Sounds like a plan." The Xelari and human fleets regrouped. Engineers rushed to repair the damage. Officers coordinated defenses, and medics worked tirelessly to treat the wounded. The war had not ended, but something had changed. For the first time, Sephora did not feel alone. A decision made. A few days later, the Xelari High Council called for an emergency meeting. The holographic chamber flickered to life, filled with the images of Xelari leaders from across the stars. Sephora stood tall, her face calm and unreadable. "The child you carry," one elder said, his voice wary. "It is a risk." Another spoke. "The Zelfar proved it. If other species learn of its existence, they may come for it." Zephora knew they were afraid. The Xilari had always been a proud race, believing in the strength of their own bloodline. But now, they faced something new, something they did not understand. A hybrid, a child of two worlds. She took a deep breath. "This child is not a risk, it is a hope." The council murmured, but she continued. "The Celt feared us. The Zelfar wanted to claim what we created. Why? Because they knew what we refused to admit. This child is the future." A long silence followed. The elders exchanged uncertain glances. Then, an unexpected voice spoke. "Sephora is right." All eyes turned to High Commander Relfar, one of the most respected military leaders in Xilari history. His deep red eyes burned with conviction. "We have fought for centuries," Relfar said. "And yet, we stand at the edge of extinction. Perhaps it is time we stop fearing change and start embracing it." The council was silent for a long time. Then, one by one, they nodded. A new alliance. The decision was made. The Xilari would no longer see the child as an anomaly. Instead, they would protect it, not out of fear, but out of faith in what it could become. Sephora and Daniel stood together as the first official agreement between humanity and the Xilari was signed. A new alliance, stronger than ever before. The news spread across the galaxy. Some species celebrated, others watched in uncertainty. And somewhere, in the darkness of space, the Zelfar observed in silence. A father's promise. Late at night, Daniel stood on the balcony of the Xilari capital, looking up at the twin moons. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Sephora. She stood beside him, her silver hair glowing in the moonlight. "You're thinking." Daniel chuckled. "That obvious." She nodded. He sighed. "I keep wondering what's next. What kind of world our kid will be born into." Sephora placed a hand on her stomach. "One we will fight for." Daniel turned to her, his expression softening. "I don't care what the galaxy says. This kid, our kid, isn't a weapon, isn't a tool. They're just a child. And I promise, no matter what happens, I'll be there." Sephora looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "So will I." For the first time in her life, she truly believed those words. And so, under the starlit sky, a promise was made. A promise that no matter what dangers lay ahead, no matter what enemies lurked in the shadows, their child would never be alone. This was the future they had fought for, and they would protect it together.